So I've fished with the Fenwick line for about a year now. I definitely have some favorite rods, wanted to share those with you. They're 4 bait cast rods, 2 spinning rods that I think really stand out that I use almost every day fishing and are my go-tos. Let me share those with you. So let's start with the bait casting and talk about moving baits. 2 rods that I really like are the 7.2 medium heavy, moderate fast, and the 7.5 medium heavy, moderate fast. Now, as most of you, I'm sure, are aware, medium heavy means the power, so that's throws a little bit lighter baits. And then ModFast means that this rod flexes really deep into the middle of the rod. It's good for treble hook lures, keeping stuff hooked up on moving baits. The 7.2, now I use this more when I'm target oriented. So from around docks, throwing to weeds, stumps and laydowns and stuff, I'll use the 7.2. When I want to fling a bait out there, I'm trying to cover more water, that's where I go with the 7.5. The 7.2, to be honest, I probably use that more than anything. Swim jigs, when I'm using a 1/4 to a 3/8 ounce, I love this. Bladed jigs, when I'm skipping them around docks, throwing them up to the bank, around grass and stuff, making a roll cast or just a moderate cast. Those 3/8 and 1/2 ounce bladed jigs works really well for that. I love that, the 7.2 medium heavy moderate fast. That bladed jigs, swim jigs, those are just a couple of the staples that I use all the time. And spinner baits as well. I mean, this rod is a joy to fish, and it has that slow bend, so the tip will load up when you cast it. It'll fling it out there easily. It'll load up so I can skip it under docks, get it under overhanging branches, and then when you hook that fish, I mean, those bladed jigs, chatterbaits and slobber knockers, and I don't care what brand you use, man, they love to throw those things. They come at you. You don't get a good hook in them. I found that a moderate action, that deep bend in a rod, really lands a lot more fish. So that's where I like that 7.2 really for bladed jigs, swim jigs. Now, sometimes if I'm on a deep grass bed or something and I'm covering water with a swim jig or a bladed jig, if I'm throwing a whopper plopper or a choppo, I'm trying to cover water with that, flinging buzz baits, I'm throwing it. I'm not being real specific. I'm not around targets. I'm not having to skip. I'm just launching this thing. I want to get it farther out there, and then I want to be able to control a fish from a long ways. That's where that little bit extra length of rod, it still has that deep bend to keep them hooked up, but it allows you to get more length and you can move more lines so you can play fish that are farther out there. So I use this a lot, even some like medium running crankbaits and stuff, it's good at that. And then lipless crankbaits, like that Berkeley Jack and your rattle traps, all that stuff. This is really a good, versatile, fling it out there and play a fish in, keep them hooked up on those moving baits. And it's not tip heavy, either one of those. That's the thing, a lot of times you're working those baits and you're keeping them over grass or something, you have to work them up. A tip heavy bait, or a tip heavy rod, it's gonna wear you out. Both of these, I like the World Class all the way down to the HMG. They're just balanced, good rods that I can fish all day and not get worn out. And one thing about Fenwick, the neat thing is they have what's called Family Flex. You heard me talk about the World Class, that's their top of the line. Then there's Elite, HMG, and Eagle. The thing about their rods, they're about the only rod company in the industry, and this takes countless hours and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to test to get the action of a rod all the way across the series. A World Class 7.5 medium fast, medium heavy is going to be the exact same action as that entry level Eagle and the Elite and the HMG. It's hard to get that, but the nice thing is if I want, say, a lightweight one for when I'm fishing tip up a lot and I want a more sensitive rod for that, but I'm just flinging spinner baits and I'm got my rod tip down the whole time. I don't care if it's a little heavier and not as lightweight, not as balanced quite as much, then the Eagle would be fine. That's the neat thing about Fenwick. So you can upgrade where you want or go with a more budget-friendly rod, but the thing is you're always going to get that consistent action. So moving baits are great, but what about a worm and a jig rod? And that's where I've settled on the 7.5 heavy or medium heavy, extra fast, and I use this in the World Class exclusively because I want as light a weight as I can and as much feel as I can while I'm working a jig and a worm. But my workhorse is the 7.5 heavy. That's anything I can get away with 1/4 ounce baits, but basically 3/8 and 1/2 ounce jigs, and if I'm throwing heavier Texas rigs and stuff, that's where I'm going to use the heavy. If I'm using, say, a Texas rig and I'm using an 1/8 ounce sinker, a 1/4 ounce, a little 1/4 ounce jig or something, finesse jig, then I'll use the medium heavy. You just get a little bit more tip with that medium heavy so you can fling that bait a little better. If I'm trying to pitch it, a light one, or I'm trying to skip docks, a lot of times I'll use that medium heavy because it has a little bit more tip. But if I'm using heavier bait, I like a little bit stiffer rod and one with more power, moving power, and that's where the heavy, that's probably my go-to. These are super well balanced, which means they feel not tip heavy at all in your hand. They're a joy to fish all day. When you're sitting there just flipping time after time all day, you're really going to appreciate the lightweight of these, how well balanced they are, and the feel of them, trying to get those light bites. So, man, the 7.5s, both the medium heavy and the heavy, these are definitely my go-tos for worms and jigs. Now, I'm kind of an old school power guy. I would love to throw the bait caster all day, every day. But I'll tell you what, I've really gotten to like a couple of the spinning rod techniques now, that when it gets tough and you can't catch them on the old bladed jig or flipping a jig, a lot of times the old jig head minnow on scope, or throwing a Nico rig, wacky rig up shallow when they won't take that jig, but you throw something light in there. It's funny how you can clean up a lot of fish, and especially when the pressure doesn't spawn and everybody's beating up the same little spawning pockets, man, it works. And there's two that I use, and you might notice most all the bass rods from Fenwick have a split grip. These ones have full cork. Well, guess what? That's because walleye guys prefer the full cork, and these are technically walleye rods. Well, newsflash, these things work pretty darn good for bass too, and most of the pro staffers love these. I'm not alone in liking these rods. The 7.2, anytime you're using that jig head minnow, it's a little bit shorter rod. It's about the perfect length where I can fling it out there and see it on scope 100 feet out, but then it's not so long where it's bulky and awkward and you can't make a little roll cast and stuff. For the jig head minnow, a 7.2, medium light, fast action, so it's not that ultra fast, lets them take it just a little bit. That is the all-around jig head minnow rod, and so many of the guys on staff love this. This is by far the number one seller for all of us, our preferred rod when it comes to jig head minnow. I'll throw in the HMG. I think it's plenty good sensitivity. You can save a few bucks. A lot of guys like the Elite and World Class, but you don't necessarily need the sensitivity when you're throwing it way out there on the jig head minnow. I mean, you can feel it when they get it. That one is the go-to for that. And then I actually have an extra jig head minnow on here, but this is actually a 7.6 medium light fast, again in the walleye lineup. But this one, when I'm throwing a Nico rig or a wacky rig, yeah, I want to skip it and get it places, but a lot of times I want to fling it out there and it's pretty light, and I can just lazily or easily lob this out there and it'll launch it out a long ways. I can stay away from those targets. And then when I'm fighting the fish, especially, that's why I want the 7.6. I'm using a light leader a lot of times, a 6 and 8 pound test, and around heavy cover and stuff. I want to keep steady pressure on those fish, not have to lean into them, but keep steady pressure, and that's where the 7.6 with that fast action with a little bit of bend keeps them hooked up really well. So jig head minnow, go with that 7.2 medium light fast. Nico and wacky, check out the 7.6 medium light fast. These are my go-to. I love them. I like this one, the World Class, because I want a little bit more feel. Like I said, HMG I think is perfectly good. Save a few bucks on the jig head minnow. I love them. Let me know your favorite ones if you're throwing some Fenwicks. Hope these help you catch a few more fish.